Hello there. Welcome into a Tuesday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you've chosen to listen on your radio, to stream the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded and are listening on the Extra Sports 1300 app, sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health, and well-being for all. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics await you, and I'd love to get your thoughts. You could call or text them in at 719-247-1313, or you can tweet at me at Gingerly Tweets. And there is one topic today in particular that I'm very excited about. I hope you're excited about it too, and I hope it sparks a lot of discussion. I'll just throw it out to begin the show, even though there's some real sports matters going on that I want to discuss leading up to it. If you could take a player from the past of your favorite team and put on this iteration of said favorite team, who would it be? I would like to do this for the four majors here in Colorado. I think the most interesting one would be the Nuggets, and that's what I'm going to start with. But what I hope is that this leads us down a lot of different paths. I am not confining it. I'm going to talk about the Nuggets. But if you're not a Nuggets fan, and you're a fan of another team, and you'd like to take part in this exercise with your favorite team, you are welcome to do so. This is as much your show as it is mine. We just don't have enough room in our imaging at the beginning of the show to include your name with mine. That's all it is. So be thinking about that. And I'll start the conversation coming up in a little bit. But like I said, there are real sports stories that are going on today that I want to get to. And I do want to start with the breaking news of the afternoon that the New York Knicks have relieved Tom Thibodeau of his duties as the head coach of said New York Knicks, citing in many ways the same thing the Denver Nuggets did. New voice. That is the all-encompassing reason to explain away, to argue with any notion that you are making a mistake. You just say, we need a new voice. Tom Thibodeau is the old voice. We need a new voice. That's what teams go to. The Nuggets went to it with Michael Malone. The Grizzlies did it with Taylor Jenkins. New voice. That's their argument. But there's a difference here if we're just comparing what the Nuggets did to what the Knicks did. And it's funny that those two franchises and their two head coaches are going to be somewhat entangled here in this story coming up. But let's just start with comparing, if we can, the Nuggets versus the Knicks. Because I do believe that the Nuggets need a different voice, and I do not believe that the New York Knicks do. Here is my reasoning. The reason that the Denver Nuggets needed a new voice is because Michael Malone was never able to find a different gear in his coaching. He wasn't able to pivot into a different type of head coach. And not everybody can. This is not, me trying to dump on Michael Malone, because the idea that you need a new voice is valid. Just some teams throw it around as kind of the be-all, end-all, and you really look into it and you're like, really, do you need a new voice? But with the Denver Nuggets, they did. Because this was a team at a different stage in their life cycle as a franchise. They're a roster full of players who have accomplished the game's greatest goal, and that is to win a title. They are not young anymore. They have young players, but the core of their team is not young. They are not young in age necessarily, and they are not young in experience anymore. They've gone through multiple playoff runs. They've been in the playoffs every year for the better part of this decade. They know what it takes to win a title. They learned what it would take to defend a title. They know all this stuff already. So having a coach whose best skill set is being able to develop a winning culture for a team that hasn't had it. And that was the role that Michael Malone was placed into. Right? Because he wasn't on the heels of George Karl, remember. He was on the heels of Brian Shaw. The Nuggets reset their franchise and needed somebody who started something in Sacramento, but because of the ownership there in California's capital city, got fired for reasons that, at least to him, are still completely unclear. And to most people, but that's how Sacramento rolls. So they bring him in with a team that hasn't accomplished anything and was young. And to Michael Malone's credit, he developed the talent that was on the roster. He instilled a winning culture, and ultimately he was able to coach them all the way to the top. But having done all that, there comes a time where it's almost like you're not building anymore, you're maintaining. And the maintenance of a championship caliber team is a very different skill set. And I'm not 100% sure that Michael Malone has that ability to perform that maintenance. It is a lot of psychology as opposed to X's and O's. It is taking your foot off the gas a little bit. It's not getting as hung up as we do as fans about every game that happens in November. And Michael Malone wasn't able to do that. And also he wasn't able to get along with the guy whose job it was to put together the roster. The New York Knicks are not in the same stage of their life cycle as the Denver Nuggets are. This Knicks team has only started to truly accomplish anything worth noting the last couple of years. And it is not a championship. Tom Thibodeau and Michael Malone are similar. They really are. There's very similar coaches. But I would argue that the Knicks still need a voice like Tom Thibodeau, because they haven't gone to a finals. And there's a lot different about this team. That's the other part with the Knicks. They traded for Mikal Bridges. They traded for Karl Anthony Towns. And now it's looking like that was their last-ditch attempt to get this team over the top. But it's like, wait a minute, you just got here. The New York Knicks have won 50 games only the last 2 seasons. They haven't been even close to an elite team up until last season. So have they truly gone through the life cycle of a championship team? Have they built up that scar tissue enough to say, well, it's just never going to happen with Tom Thibodeau? I don't think so. Josh Kroenke talked about, the championship window opening for the Denver Nuggets in 2021. The championship window for the New York Knicks, has it even opened yet? Is it just now opening? I mean, we really have to look at this here. This team was nowhere like 2 years ago. And now because they lose to the Indiana Pacers, it's not good enough? And they have to make a change? I think the powers that be in New York fell victim to the Knick hysteria that transpired after the Knicks beat the Celtics. And you remember it, like the fans were celebrating like they won a title. Every player on the New York Knicks had a street named after him, temporarily, of course. There was a Tyler Kolek Boulevard somewhere in New York City. Like they acted like they won the title. And then they were met with the harsh reality that Indiana is a really good basketball team and just so happens to be a terrible matchup for the slower, plodding New York Knicks team. And it was that sense of, because they had knocked off the champions, that now it was their manifest destiny to win the title, or at least to go to the NBA Finals, and they completely dismissed the idea that the Indiana Pacers would give them any problems. And I think goalposts were moved back. I think the bar was raised, but in today's NBA, it is about matchups. And Indiana was a bad one for them. So you could honestly see how the Knicks could be triumphant over the Boston Celtics, but could then turn around and lose to Indiana. I'm not saying that was my prediction, but you saw some warning signs that say this is not going to be easy for the Knicks. I just think whether it's Dolan, the owner, whether it's Leon Rose, somebody making this decision suddenly thought, because they had gotten past the Boston Celtics, that it was a foregone conclusion that they would make the NBA Finals. And when they didn't, that was Tom Thibodeau falling short of expectation and thus them needing a new voice. I don't follow that logic. I think that's their logic. I'm not buying it. I'm not following it. That doesn't make sense. You look at other teams around the NBA who have toiled for years to get. Minnesota is another one. Chris Finch, last time I checked, he's not getting fired. That's a better example than the Denver Nuggets. Why is Minnesota sticking with Chris Finch after another Western Conference Finals loss? Because they just got here. The New York Knicks, I think, made the wrong decision. And they got a little bit full of themselves, and they got a little bit entitled because of what happened in the Boston series. And they felt like they deserved to go to the NBA Finals. And the Indiana Pacers said, no, you can't. And this is an overreaction. This is an overreaction to a season that was not a failure. It was progress. There was progress in New York this year. And yet Thibodeau still getting fired. And the wildest part about all of this is that the name you are going to hear most with this job is none other than Michael Malone. Explain to me why Michael Malone would be the ideal candidate. And you're going to hear people say, well, he won a title. Okay. He won a title with Nikola Jokic And last time I checked, the New York Knicks don't have a single player even remotely comparable to Nikola Jokic. But fine, Michael Malone has a championship on his resume. Tom Thibodeau doesn't. So that's an easy argument for you to make. But basically what you would be doing is trading in Tom Thibodeau for Tom Thibodeau with an NBA championship ring. So if they do, in fact, hire Michael Malone, they're actually saying that a lot of what Tom Thibodeau does, they like. They just want somebody that has a championship ring. Because all the arguments that I hear, the complaints I hear from the Knicks, tell me if this sounds familiar. Tom Thibodeau doesn't trust the bench. He wears down his players, both physically and a little bit mentally. He coaches them hard. At times, he coaches them too hard. This all sounds like Michael Malone. So if the New York Knicks' grand plan here is to replace Tom Thibodeau with Michael Malone, you're inviting the exact... I fast forward to next season when Michael Malone doesn't play the bench. When you hear murmurs, and there will be because the New York media, they'll unearth things that maybe people in this state can't. It is a very different stage. The lights are a lot brighter and not a lot escapes the media there. You will hear of that players are a little bit worn out by Michael Malone. You will hear Knicks fans complain that Michael Malone is not trusting the bench because it was the exact same things that you and I have talked about for the last couple of years. So unless this firing of Michael Malone in Denver has suddenly given him an epiphany and he goes into the New York Knicks offices and says, no, I learned I should have used the bench more in Denver. I should have, taken my foot off the gas a little bit. I should have been easier on the players. Like Michael Malone, to me, if I'm running the Knicks, if I'm saying that the way that Tom Thibodeau does things is not getting results, then I would need to hear from somebody that they are doing it in a different way than Tom Thibodeau. And the Michael Malone that I last saw does things almost identical to Tom Thibodeau. The only difference is that Michael Malone had Nikola Jokic. But oh, by the way, Michael Malone spent years in the playoffs. The bubble, the 2 years without Jamal Murray, and then he won a title. The New York Knicks, again, have won 50 games 2 years in a row. This is a rash decision. And if Michael Malone is really the front runner for this job, I don't know how people in New York can look at themselves in the mirror and say, we got what we need. We got better. But it's a different world in New York City, isn't it, when it comes to sports? Patience, a little bit thinner than it is in Denver, I suppose. But this makes no sense. It makes no sense to me. And the idea that Michael Malone would be the perfect replacement for Tom Thibodeau makes even less sense. Michael Malone needs to go to San Antonio. Michael Malone needs to go to New Orleans, Atlanta, maybe not even Atlanta. He needs to go to a place full of young players that have no idea how to even routinely make the playoffs. That's what he's best suited for, and he'll be terrific in that job. But this Knick job doesn't seem tailor-made for Michael Malone to come in and get the Knicks the championship that they felt they so rightly deserved because Jason Tatum hurt himself and killed any chance for the Boston Celtics to come back in that series. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the Knicks firing Tom Thibodeau, but also probably more so Michael Malone in New York. It's been talked about for a little while. Could it be a real thing now? And speaking of potential coaching moves, well, what do we have here? Looks like maybe I wasn't overreacting to what Pete DeBoer said after the Dallas Stars were eliminated from the Western Conference Finals. Already getting some texts in on What will be the primary topic of conversation coming up in just a little bit, which is if you could take a player from your favorite team's past and put them on the current iteration of your favorite team, who would that be? We'll get into that coming up in just a little bit. See, this is what I love about you. You're able to not be as verbose as I am, and you get right to the point. I spent nearly 20 minutes talking about the New York Knicks' decision to fire Tom Thibodeau and the idea that many have floated that Michael Malone would be best to take over in New York City. And Aaron on the text line took 4 words and a period. Correct punctuation, very important on the text messages. 4 words and a punctuation mark to sum up basically what I said in 20 minutes. James Dolan is dumb. Good job, Aaron. That's kind of what my point was. I would say that the biggest issue with the New York Knicks is that when they beat the Boston Celtics, they felt they were entitled to an NBA Finals appearance. Surely this, team from this hick town in the Midwest is going to give us no issues because we knocked off the defending champions. And that warped the view of what this season had been. I look at this Knicks season, even the way it ended, and say this was progress. They got better. And Tom Thibodeau's a reason for that. But because you're not playing in the NBA Finals, all of a sudden it's not good enough. I get it. Everything's faster in New York. I've been to New York City. That city moves at warp speed. But being an elite team, forget about even being a championship team, which I don't know that the Knicks have been since the days of Ewing. They've only been an elite team, a 50-win team for 2 years. And now everything's not good enough and they need to make a drastic change. The Knicks will nick, right? Hasn't always been the most well-run organization in professional sports. And it's just a reminder, right? And I think the best example I can give is the Rockies, right? Because there were times where the Rockies were very good. But the constant was that Dick Monfort was still a terrible owner. Sometimes you get a smart person to put together your roster, or you get a collection of talent because you get a bunch of high draft picks, or you kind of luck out in some ways. I don't think most people thought that Jalen Brunson would become this in New York. Maybe they did, and kudos to them for that. But even whether you're winning or whether you're losing, one thing I find in sports is that your owner is still the same level of good the entire time. There are really good owners whose teams are bad. There are terrible owners whose teams have been good. There are poorly run franchises that somehow find their way to the World Series in 2007. And then there are franchises that are really smart and they just don't ever get a bite at that apple. And the New York Knicks, for most of my life, have not been a good organization. So even though really good team, made some really good decisions, maybe still not the best run organization in the NBA. But as I said, speaking of coaching news, I really debated this with myself, as I tend to do, because unless it's between 3 and 6, nobody listens to anything I have to say except myself. I didn't want to be a prisoner of the moment, because I think I did this with Valeri Nichushkin a little bit after what happened when they lost to Seattle. And it was like, oh, there's no way they could bring him back. And looking back, I think for a lot of different reasons, I was being a little bit of a prisoner of the moment and not looking at everything. When I heard Pete DeBoer say this after his team was eliminated from the postseason,
I didn't take that lightly, and I didn't blame it all on Jake. But, the reality is if you go back to last year's playoffs, he's lost 6 to 7 games to Edmonton, and we gave up 2 shots on 2 goals in an elimination game.
When I heard him say that, and I pictured the metaphorical wheels of the bus driving over one of the best goalies in the National Hockey League, I really tried to talk myself out of the idea that it was a fireable offense, because I didn't want to be a prisoner of the moment. I want to look at it and say, look, Pete DeBoer did a lot of good for that Dallas team. Do I know all the dynamics of the relationship between Pete DeBoer and Jake Ottinger? I did this kind of once earlier when Jake Ottinger was pulled from the Avs game in that series, and I was like, oh, this isn't going to be good, and it turned out okay for them. But I'm like, I don't know how this is going to be received. And you couple it with the fact that Pete DeBoer, you want to talk about a guy. So the Knicks are firing Tom Thibodeau after they made the Eastern Conference Finals once. Pete DeBoer has lost 6 conference finals in the last 7 years. You want to talk about perspective. If there is somebody that appears like they have gotten as far as they're possibly going to get, and maybe a different voice is needed, it's more Pete DeBoer than it is Tom Thibodeau. But I said, I don't think this is going to go over well. Even if he pulled Jake Ottinger from that final game of the Edmonton series, and it was because of Jake Ottinger's track record, you just don't bring it up. Every coach just knows you don't throw your goaltender under the bus. You make it about everyone else. We needed a spark. And Pete DeBoer, in his exasperated state, having banged his head against the wall yet again against the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Finals, just couldn't help himself. And I said that, plus the fact that they've been reaching this stage and haven't been getting past it, maybe it would lead to Pete DeBoer getting fired. And Jake Ottinger spoke the day after and said he was indeed embarrassed. And that's what I said. Pete DeBoer embarrassed him by pulling him. And Jake Ottinger said as much. And now we're getting reports that the players on the Dallas Stars did not take what Pete DeBoer did in that press conference well. They did not agree with it. Dave Pagnotta tweeting out yesterday that his comments, the way he handled it, and maybe there's some behind-the-scenes stuff, the players are not necessarily in love with Pete DeBoer right now. And I understand it, because to me, he crossed a line that coaches just don't cross when it comes to pulling a goaltender. Now, there's been no official word out of Dallas, but the vultures are circling. Kevin Weeks tweeted out a picture, as he tends to do, of the Stars Arena with the eyeball emoji. Now, he could be having a little bit of fun, and maybe what he's going to report has nothing to do with Pete DeBoer. But he's not the only person talking about this. So we'll see what comes out of it. But at the very least, and this is what I conceded after the Oilers clinched their spot in the Stanley Cup final, there needed to be a little bit of a patching up, a little bit of a making up going on here. But even if that relationship is able to be patched up a little bit, you still have the resume. You still have another season where you got to the Western Conference Final and fell short again. And for Pete DeBoer, this is 6 times in 7 years. Most of those have been with Dallas. It was not a good time to embarrass your goalie, to toss him under the bus, given your recent track record. So we'll see what happens in Dallas. But it leads me to another thought I had that I will get to. And we'll reset at the top of the hour with the topic of bringing the player back. But I'm late for a break. I'm just going to ask this question, and then we'll delve into it after the break. We've gone through a few different opinions on all of this, and we'll go through more. But as of right now, on June 3rd, can you say unequivocally that there was a winner in the Mikko Rantanen saga this year? Not just the one trade, both. So we'll call it a saga. Are there any winners here? I don't know if there is. We'll talk about it next on Extra Sports 1300. Now, time will ultimately tell who won one of the more significant in-season trades we have seen in NHL history. And I guess followed shortly thereafter by the only other trade in recent NHL history to rival it. Of course, I'm talking about the Avs initially trading Mikko Rantanen to Carolina, and then Carolina a few weeks later trading him to Dallas. Now, I just got done talking about how Pete DeBoer has some making up to do because the way he threw Jake Ottinger under the bus after embarrassing him in the final game of the Western Conference Final did not sit well with a team that has been butting their heads up against the same wall, which is the Western Conference Finals, for a few years now. This, of course, on the same day that Tom Thibodeau gets fired because apparently 2 50-win seasons you've arrived and it is your birthright to win a championship and you need a different voice. Who's the winner right now in the Mikko Rantanen thing, saga? Are any of these people, entities, winners right now? Can you classify any of them as winners? Let's start with the Colorado Avalanche. So they get no further with all this depth that they acquired, both in the Mikko Rantanen trade and then thereafter acquiring Brock Nelson. They go no further in the playoffs. In fact, they go less far. They bow out earlier. And now you have the initial feeling was, well, Brock Nelson's probably not going to sign in Colorado. Now, there has been a positive change over the last week that apparently he's amenable to returning to the Colorado Avalanche, which is good. And hopefully whatever changed his mind or whatever it may be, hopefully it works, because I think it is absolutely necessary for the Colorado Avalanche to retain the services of Brock Nelson. And now you have some reports that maybe Marty Necas didn't exactly love his time this year in Colorado. And that is a player that you basically just kicked the can down the road in many ways, right? You had to make a decision on Mikko Rantanen this year. Marty Necas is under contract for this year, but then he's going to become a free agent. So you could potentially have this same situation with Marty Necas. And he didn't love, apparently, his time. Nick Kypreos reporting. Didn't love his time in Colorado. Now, take that report for what it's worth. I think at least you have to look at it from the standpoint of Marty Necas is playing alongside the best player in the world. Couldn't his agent be doing the math in his head and say, hey, man, maybe you shouldn't take the first deal Colorado offers you, because if you play with number 29 for a whole year, imagine what you could make on the open market. So maybe Marty Necas, maybe it's being overstated, his feelings about being in Colorado. Maybe it's actually true that he didn't love being in Colorado. And one theory that I could throw out is, the way Nathan MacKinnon is may not fit with everybody from a personality standpoint. Right? Not everyone is fit to play with Nathan MacKinnon or be in a locker room with Nathan MacKinnon, who can be, if we're being honest, a bit much sometimes. Now, he's a bit much for the betterment of the franchise, but some guys don't like other players getting on them. And I don't know, maybe there were some things behind the scenes. Maybe Marty Necas got in the crosshairs of Nathan MacKinnon. Maybe he had a bowl of ice cream in the locker room and Nathan MacKinnon flipped over a table. I don't know. But I could see where this report has some validity. It doesn't mean that Marty Necas hates Denver and he wants to be out the first opportunity and he'd never resign. I don't want to go too far with it. But the first impression, the honeymoon phase of all of this, I could understand where he goes, yeah, it wasn't great so far. And there's still hope that maybe he grows into it and maybe he fits in a little bit better, a full season, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe it could just be a negotiating tactic by a pending UFA. But until Marty Necas signs on the dotted line and until they have Brock Nelson back, there is a potential here that by this time next year, the Colorado Avalanche will not have Brock Nelson nor Marty Necas. And he's a restricted free agent, so I think they could keep Jack Drury if they want to. But they could lose Necas and Brock Nelson. Meanwhile, they also gave up Callum Ritchie and a first-round draft pick next year in order to bring in Brock Nelson with the money they freed up from trading Mikko Rantanen. So you put all of that stuff together. Do the Avs look like winners in all of this right now? No. So let's go to Carolina. The intermediary to get Mikko Rantanen, as it turned out, from Colorado to Dallas, because there would be no way Colorado would directly deal with Jim Nill and hand Mikko Rantanen over to a division rival. Carolina. They probably are the biggest losers in all of this. Because for whatever reason, they weren't able to get Mikko Rantanen to sign on the dotted line. So they basically had to make a panic move to get Logan Stankoven, young player, like the player, but he's younger, and a draft pick from Dallas, essentially turning back their clock when they were a team that was getting Mikko Rantanen to try and push them over the top. They were basically upgrading Marty Necas to Mikko Rantanen in order to break through in the East. And where did it get them? One more win in the Eastern Conference Finals than they had the previous year, or in the year before that, by the way. That's it. So right now they look like the furthest thing from the winners in all of this. And then you go to Dallas, who gets no further with Mikko Rantanen than they did with a non-Mikko Rantanen team the year prior, which perhaps leads to the frustration. And Pete DeBoer ends up pulling Jake Ottinger after 2 shots in the last game of the Western Conference Final and then throws him under the bus. And now there are questions of whether Pete DeBoer is going to get fired. They give up a young player that can help their depth in a Logan Stankoven. Like, I would take Mikko Rantanen over Logan Stankoven. But Mikko Rantanen also costs about $12 million more than it costs for Logan Stankoven. And you don't get production out of Mikko Rantanen in the Western Conference Final, and you end up in the same place you have been in the previous 2 seasons. So does Dallas feel like a winner? They felt like a winner after the Avs series, that's for dang sure. Not so much now. And then, last but not least, how about Mikko Rantanen himself, who ends up having to spend a few weeks with the Carolina Hurricanes, and I will not disparage that fine city that the Hurricanes play in. I will make it about the hockey fit and say that Mikko Rantanen was probably quite miserable playing in that system. He had to spend a few weeks there to get to a place that he's probably much happier in. So that's a positive. But then by the end of, he goes from being the hero to living long enough to become the villain. No production out of him in the Western Conference Finals. Some of the fans that were trumpeting his arrival as this white knight are now like, what are we paying for $12 million over the next 8 years? To say nothing of the fact that $12 million was less than $500,000 more per season than the Avalanche offered him. And he leaves the only NHL city he's ever known, leaves the side of the best player in the world, not named Connor McDavid, takes a lot of heat from the media, and doesn't go to a Stanley Cup final. Avalanche, Hurricanes, Stars, Mikko Rantanen, as of today on June 3rd, none of them look like they won. The only thing you could say is that Mikko Rantanen got his long-term extension, but again, for $400K more a year than the Avalanche reportedly last offered him. Oh, but I know. I'm sorry. Current state of the NHL. No state taxes. So Mikko Rantanen did win because he gets $12 million in Texas instead of $12 million in Colorado. That makes him the winner. I don't know that anybody looks like a winner right now. Which is crazy because when you have a tectonic shift in the NHL that we all felt when Mikko Rantanen was dealt just to Carolina, to say nothing of when he was dealt from Carolina to Dallas, somebody had to be a winner here. Somebody put themselves over the top. Either the Avalanche got the depth that they required to put them over the top. Nope. Carolina got the difference-making player to put them in the into the Stanley Cup final. Nope. Dallas thought they got the guy to push them over the top. Nope. And now all three of these franchises are in not a great spot right now. None of them are in a good spot. All of them have some serious work to do. All three will expect to go to the Stanley Cup final next year. Unequivocally. None of those three teams, Carolina, Colorado, or Dallas, should have their sights set any lower than playing in the series that Edmonton and Florida are getting ready to play tomorrow. But there's a lot of work to do. We might have a coach fired. Jason Robertson now might get traded. Colorado might not be able to keep anybody they got in return for Mikko Rantanen. Nobody feels like a winner right now in that trade. We'll check back in about when free agency begins and see where we feel everybody is at that point. 719-247-1313. All right, coming up next, I've teased it long enough. Let's get to it. If you could take a player from your favorite team's past and bring them to your favorite team's present, who would that be and why? Let's start with the Nuggets, shall we? Or any other basketball team you'd like to discuss. Welcome in Drive Time Sports on this Tuesday. A reminder, you can watch the show live on a daily basis as you're scrolling through your favorite social media platform, whether it be Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, or X. We are at XTRA Sports 1300, and I certainly do appreciate the support. Every click, every view allows me to do this on a daily basis, and I get way more out of this than probably you do, but that's why I say thank you. If you'd like to interact with the show, 719-247-1313. You could call or text in, or speaking of social media, you could tweet at me at Gingerly Tweets. I've been teasing this for about an hour. And now it's time to get to it. We've gotten some of the news of the day out of the way. We'll get back to that. Do not worry. We'll balance it out. But the question is, if you could take a player from your favorite team's past and bring it to your favorite team's present to fix them, to optimize them, to get them to where you want to see them, who would that be? You know, this is the time of year where we're all throwing out ideas on how to fix our favorite teams. Well, here's an avenue that is not actually available to your favorite team, bringing somebody from the past into the present. And I will do this for every team that we talk about on a regular basis. And I will open it up because I think it's a great conversation to have beyond our borders, right? If you're not a fan of a Colorado team, I don't want to leave you out of this. You could play along too at 719-247-1313. But as I was thinking about this question and applying it to each one of the four major professional sports teams in the state of Colorado, the one that I had the most fun thinking of was the Nuggets. Because I think that there's one, as opposed to, let's say the baseball team, you could make one of these moves and believe that it would get them to another title. The problem with the Rockies, and I'll just throw it out right now for and we'll talk about the Rockies at another time. But for me, the Rockies is just, what player do you want to see play again? The Rockies are still going to be terrible. By the way, if only 5,800 people are in attendance to witness the Rockies' 10th win of the season, did it actually happen? That was the paid attendance in Miami yesterday. Here's a what if. I feel like I'm going down a lot of what if paths today. What if baseball just never expanded to Miami and Colorado? Like, how much worse off would the world be? I don't know. I don't know that anybody would miss them. Especially in Miami, they wouldn't even know. You could take them away tomorrow, and most people in Miami would have no idea. 5,800 people, my God. It is still professional baseball, people. What else are you doing? Which, as I'm saying that, it's Miami. There's a lot to do. So, fair point. But it just goes to mind, like, if Miami and Colorado never came into the league, how much different would our lives be? I don't think much different. I don't think we'd miss them. Even if we knew that they were being taken from us, I don't know that we'd miss either franchise. Anyway, with the Rockies, it's very much just, who do you want to watch again? Because the team's going to be putrid. There's no player that you can add that's ultimately going to put them over the top. But it's a fun conversation to have. But when it comes to the Nuggets, Avs, and Broncos, they're all in the space where you go, this one move I might make could get them a title. And I had the most fun pondering the Denver Nuggets. And here's where I arrived. I think the player from the Nuggets past that I would bring and place onto this team is Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And what warmed my heart today, because I knew that I would be doing the world a service, I had a younger coworker of mine ask me who Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf is and was. And it warmed my heart because people need to know about who Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was and just how freaking good Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was. Now, is he the greatest Nugget ever? No. You could bring in Alex English. You could bring in a David Thompson. You could even bring in a Carmelo Anthony to this team and have a better player than Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was. But what Rauf brought to the table was exactly what this Nuggets team needs. The ability to knock down shots. And when he was in his prime, and you think of the year that that lowly Nuggets team somehow, some way beat Jordan's Bulls, and the shooting display that Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf would put on his pretty regular basis. It didn't get the Nuggets anywhere because the rest of the roster was so horrendously bad. But could you imagine Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf catching those passes from Nikola Jokic, standing in the corner as the Oklahoma City Thunder are quadruple teaming Nikola Jokic, and he still finds a way to find Rauf in the corner? He might shoot 100% playing in this Nuggets offense. He might shoot 100%. The guy was prolific as a shooter. And that's precisely what the Nuggets need more than anything else. And I was asked this question a while back by somebody, I think it was actually on this show, maybe a caller that called in or a texter, but asked me who the ideal player to put with Nikola Jokic. If I could take anybody in the NBA and put him on a team with Nikola Jokic, who would it be? And I said Steph Curry. And this is going to hit people's ears wrong, but trust me when I say this. And if you watch those Nuggets teams, you will know what I'm saying is an absolute truth. Before Steph Curry, there was Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Not saying that Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was better than Steph Curry, because Steph Curry is the best shooter the NBA has ever seen. But that type of player is what Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was. But he played in a time, and that's where this exercise is good too, is it gets us thinking about different eras and what skill sets were or were not appreciated at the time. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was not a hot commodity back when he played. The game was much more physical than it is now. There was less of a, three-point shooting was not what it is now. The importance of it wasn't there when Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was playing. But with these rules, with what wins in today's NBA, with the best passer at least the best passing big man in the history of basketball. Before all is said and done, we're going to have a conversation about Nikola Jokic being the best passer at any position ever. Could you imagine the damage that a player like Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf would have in today's NBA? And I know things took a turn in Denver. And kind of the way I explained Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf to that coworker of mine is he was Steph Curry before Steph Curry, but he was also kind of Colin Kaepernick before Colin Kaepernick. You remember the national anthem, and because of his belief system and when he converted to Islam, that's how things soured in Denver. And you think about the support that Colin Kaepernick got for what he did. If he would have done that in the 90s, he wouldn't have found nearly the support. And I am not here to talk about the merits of what he did. I'm just giving anybody who may not be aware a little bit of a history lesson on why Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf perhaps didn't have the staying power or the stature in the game that maybe he deserved with his talents. Part of it was he was playing for an absolute garbaggio Denver Nuggets team. But also what happened really, I mean, it turned Nuggets fans against him, let alone the rest of the NBA. But if we're just talking about the player, the skill set, to bring Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf to this iteration of the Denver Nuggets would be better than any trade you would put in the trade machine. There's not one player that you could actually make work to get to Denver that would give the Nuggets more of what they need than what I am proposing right now with the time machine. But here's the part of this that, and there are no rules other than it has to be a player from your team's past. It has to be that iteration of the player. That's also a very important point. Some of these teams have had great players, but were they great? Were they at the height of their powers with the organization in Colorado? So like for instance, if you were picking we were talking about the Avalanche and you said, well, Ray Bourque. Well, yeah, Ray Bourque, one of the greatest defensemen of all time, but you're not getting Ray Bourque when he was with Boston. That's only Bruins fans can do that. You're getting him as an Avalanche, which was not the same level of Ray Bourque. Good, but not even on the blue line. There are about 3 other guys you would take if you would look that way with the Avalanche. But so those are really the only rules. The one kind of butterfly effect, I suppose, that I was thinking about after that was, okay, so I'm thinking about Rauf playing with Nikola Jokic. Who else is on the floor? And I'm like, well, it would be Christian Brown, it would be Michael Porter, and it would be Aaron Gordon. What about Jamal Murray? Am I making some time trade? And Jamal Murray goes back to those Denver Nuggets? No. So that's another level of this conversation that you go, okay, I like Rauf. I don't want Jamal Murray to be the 2 guard. I would want Christian Brown to be with him. Not because Christian Brown's a better player, but because Christian Brown is the right player to have in my newly made Nuggets lineup. And I still want Gordon. And I still want the ability. We're not making any other trades, and like trading Michael Porter for Kevin Durant. So I'd want Porter to give me the chance for another shooter. I don't know that Jamal Murray would fit next to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. So now am I putting Jamal Murray on the bench? That's not going to go over well. So I guess the way I thought of it was just forget who else is on the guess being selective, who you're going to replace ultimately in the lineup. You can either take that into account or you cannot. I didn't really take it into account when I thought of Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. If I was taking it into account, might be a different player. Ponder that. You send me your thoughts. Let's start with the Nuggets, but I'm getting them in for other teams, and we'll get to those. But my claim is, if there is one player from the Nuggets past that could give the Nuggets exactly what I think they need to get back to an NBA Finals, it's Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Take your thoughts. 719-247-1313. More Drive Time Sports after this. The 45th U.S. Senior Open is returning to the Broadmoor for a record-tying third time. Get your tickets to see the world's best golfers compete June 26th through the 29th at ussenioropen.com. Couple different paths, a few different interaction on the text line. Great. And I hope that you're hanging on. I want to get to these because great point. I clearly touched a nerve bringing up the paid attendance of the Marlins Rockies game being 5,800. And that brings up how not only do the Marlins not do a very good job at all in bringing people into their stadium, but also how bad the Rockies are as a draw in any ballpark they visit. In fact, they are not even the best draw most nights at Coors Field. It's the other team. To that end, by the way, from the 719, what's crazy is that the Marlins have 2 World Series championships. It is crazy. And it furthers my point that, owners don't really, I think for the most part, owners don't get good or get bad. Right? Like Florida has been a mess of an organization since the moment they arrived in Major League Baseball. And yet, because they hired the right dude to scout, they were able to put together a team that won a title, and then they tore it down. And then they built it back up and won again. But it doesn't make the Marlins any less of a mess of an organization. They're still a terrible organization, but it just goes to show that sometimes you can succeed in spite of how much of a mess your franchise is, but it's not going to happen a lot. Right? But to my earlier point of what if the Rockies and the Marlins just vanished from existence? Would anybody miss them? Growing up in a Yankee family, I could tell you that the second Marlins title to be vacated or given to the AL team that year would be very welcome. And it would just add to the Yankee mystique and the dynasty they had at that time. But the Marlins stood in their way of winning, what would that have been, a fourth title in 6 years? 7 years. They three-peated. They lost to the Diamondbacks. Then it was Bonds versus the Angels, and then the Yankees came back and lost to the Marlins. And then think about the team in 97 with the Cleveland Indians. That was a great team. Yeah, Vizquel. Didn't they have both Alomars on that team? Tomey? Kenny Lofton? I might be just now naming random Cleveland Indians and not actually members of that team. I think they were all on that team. Maybe Robbie Alomar wasn't. Sandy was. Or you look at, and I don't have it in front of me, who the Marlins beat in the NLCS those 2 years to go. But if history it became that the Indians won a World Series in 97 and the Yankees won one in, what year was that? 03? Would baseball be any worse? Nope. From the 719, the AA Portland Sea Dogs averaged 5,100 in a stadium that seats 7,300. That ranked 18th in minor league baseball. This is great research. Thanks for this. Number 1 was AAA Lehigh Valley, the Iron Pigs, of course. Used to be managed by Ryan Sandberg, right? Averaged just about 8,000. The Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs average about 8,000 people a game. And one step higher, Major League Baseball, Marlins, Rockies last night, less than 6,000 people. That is horrific. And we could rope the Rays into this too. But the Rays, I don't want to include so much because they do produce on the field. But you could bring up the Rays too. You could bring up the A's. Like there are just some organizations that you look at and you're like the A's history certainly saves them, but you're talking about the Rays, the Rockies, and the Marlins, who are all expansion clubs. Like the A's have a proud history, but just what the A's have been most of my life, other than when Mulder, Hudson, and Zito were there, what they've been most, especially recent memory. You just look at some of these places and you're like, do we really need baseball here? And I know the Oakland thing, I shouldn't even include it because the Oakland thing is a whole, but like Tampa, Florida / Miami, Denver. And the argument is, well, Denver draws. It's good. It's a great site for Major League Baseball to see Coors Field. And I get it. That's what everybody brings up. Everybody brings up what a great ballpark. When the Rockies have been talked about every day on ESPN, whether it's SportsCenter, PTI, the Pat McAfee show, they're being brought up every day now. And the caveat is always, it's a shame because it's a great ballpark. Or they draw people because it's a great ballpark. I think that's important. I think it's very important. And Jeff Passan did this in one of his interviews with Pat McAfee a while back, talking about how the Rockies are still supported. It's like, it's semantics, but it's important. It's important to note that the people there, the vast majority of them, the ones that make it look like a great atmosphere and make it look like the Rockies are being supported, like they're being financially supported by those people, but they're not going to support the Rockies. It sounds like semantics, but to me, it's actually a very important distinction. And you know this as well as I do. So when you say, wow, the Rockies still get all that support, they actually don't get that support. They're actually not that well supported. If it wasn't for sunsets and party decks, the Rockies would be the Marlins. And then maybe it would help Major League Baseball do something about all this. But it's just the point that we have these, they expanded and we have these markets where it's like they're not supported or they're poorly run. And in Miami's case, they're both. In Colorado's case, they're one of the two. In Tampa Bay, they're one of the two. So it's like, take the Rays organization and put it in Coors Field. That's not a new thought. And I'm not the only one that's had it, but wouldn't that be just perfect? Take the Rays, put them at Coors Field. You already tried to put them in Montreal for half of the year. Have them play in Colorado. Be so much better. All right, back to the other conversation. My assertion that you could, if you were to take one player from the Nuggets past and put it on this team, that would get them to back where they need to be, which is the NBA Finals. It would be Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. What this team needs, whether it's from the bench, whether it's from the starters, they need dudes to knock down shots. And the best that I have seen do it in a Nuggets uniform all time is Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And with the importance on the three-point line and how prevalent three-point shooting is, he would feast. He'd absolutely feast playing with Nikola Jokic. Some of your thoughts from the 303, Alex English, because of course, why not? And that's fine. Like, hey, you just want to take the best player from your team's past and put him on this. iteration of your team, that's cool. That's cool. You don't think Alex English playing next to Nikola Jokic would feast? He just would feast in a different way. And I think that list would be English, Thompson, and Melo. Right? Players that you could say, because there was AI, but was AI at the height of his powers when he was a Denver Nugget? I don't think he was, but he'd be great with Nikola Jokic. That's what's so fun about the Nuggets. You can make a case for anybody because guess what? They're playing with Nikola Jokic. But I think for the Nuggets, if you just took David Thompson, Carmelo Anthony, or Alex English and put them on this team, they would all be even greater than they were when they were with the Denver Nuggets. So though any of those guys, and this one specifically, Alex English, not a wrong answer by any stretch of the imagination. Alex English on this Nuggets team would be awesome. The players that I would say, and if you listen to the show enough, I think you would accuse me of saying, well, Ryan wants Carmelo Anthony back, so Carmelo Anthony gets all the love and adoration because he loves Carmelo Anthony so much. It would actually be David Thompson. Thank you very much. Because I never saw him. And that's another aspect of this. So I saw Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. I saw what he did, and I can project it to what he would be in today's NBA playing with Nikola Jokic and say that would be dynamite. But if there was a Nuggets player, simply one that would help the Nuggets be a better team, but also would fulfill, a wish I had as a sports fan of a certain age, I never saw David Thompson. Never. And Alex English, too. I never saw these guys play. But David Thompson, I mean, in Colorado, he's almost like a mythical figure. Like, I talked to people that saw David Thompson play. My father, when he was alive, would tell me all the time about David Thompson. And it was just that idea of, like, he didn't say it this way, but it was always his tone. Like, you don't understand how good David Thompson was. Like, you can't understand how good David Thompson was. And I know he had, obviously, his issues. And then I'm like, Dad, I've seen the highlights. He's like, no, you don't understand how good David Thompson was. So from that aspect, I would love to see David Thompson on this iteration of the Denver Nuggets. I mean, I got a pretty good idea. David Thompson. I mean, in 16th Street Mall at the old ESPN zone, I saw the art of David Thompson. Like, I'm familiar with David Thompson. Skywalker, the whole thing. That's a joke because obviously that doesn't encapsulate who David Thompson was. But you remember the ESPN zone at the 16th Street Mall? Had David Thompson in there. Wasn't he holding a lightsaber? Anyway. But yeah, for to be able to see a player from my team's past that I've never gotten to watch, David Thompson playing with Nikola Jokic would be phenomenal. Well, let me get another text in here because I got a couple here. Tyler says Antonio McDyess. And Antonio McDyess is not better than David Thompson, but I feel like, and Tyler, you could back me up on this. And I've said this about I just said this about Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf too, but I think with Antonio McDyess, he is very much one of those players that I would go to my kids and be like, you don't understand how good Antonio McDyess was. Like, the Nuggets wasted Antonio McDyess. They wasted Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. In some ways, they even wasted English, Thompson, and Carmelo. But like Antonio McDyess was so freaking good. And it didn't matter. It made no difference. Going back to my opening monologue yesterday about how the NBA's shifting from a strong link sport to a weak link sport, where maybe having the best player on the floor does not get you as far as it used to. Well, the Nuggets many nights had the best player on the floor and Antonio McDyess. It's just that everything else was so bad that it didn't make a difference. It was still very much a strong link sport back when Antonio McDyess played. It's just that everything was so bad around him that it didn't matter. But Antonio McDyess would be good. Here's one for the Nuggets, Chauncey Billups. Yeah. I loved getting AI. Don't get me wrong. It's one of my top 5 favorite things that I have experienced growing up as a Nuggets fan is the day they landed AI. Like I remember where I was and what I was doing. And I was glued to my television. I was watching the TNT interview. John Thompson, Allen Iverson's college coach, did it with him. And it was this whole idea that now AI is going to rehabilitate his career and he's going to get that championship that eluded him. He's teaming up with Carmelo. I think the weather was really bad that day too, but that was one of my top 5 moments when AI got there. I was like, I can't even repeat on the radio for fear of getting our FCC license pulled what I said when I found out AI was going to be a Denver Nugget. The first word of the phrase was holy. And it wasn't even the S word that I said after that. It was the other one. But it was a little bit painful. It was a little bittersweet. To get AI. But yeah, Chauncey Billups will be really good. And the problem is, and it's kind of the same thing as I'm talking about with Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. If you brought in a Chauncey Billups, how would Jamal Murray exist with the Denver Nuggets? I mean, it's the same issue I ran into with Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Like, what do you do with Jamal Murray? Now, I could be cheeky and say, well, I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone because the Nuggets get the shooting that they need in the starting 5 with Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, and then you get Jamal Murray as a permanent player coming off the bench. That solves your depth issues, but human dynamics come into play. I don't know if it would quite work. But you can't play, if you brought in Chauncey Billups, you can't play Jamal Murray. And maybe kind of this exercise too, as we're going through it, it's like maybe it just goes to show that it really, forgetting what they could get in return and how feasible it is and everything like that. Like McDyess, Tyler's suggestion of McDyess, that would be in lieu of Aaron Gordon, right? You would have the same, but you'd essentially upgrade, right? Or would he be for Porter? McDyess and Aaron Gordon both throwing down all the time. I don't know. I think you might need to put McDyess in for Gordon. Thompson and English, you could still, I think, have Jamal Murray. But like a few of these suggestions, it's like the odd man out, the guy you're replacing is Jamal Murray. I wonder if there's a deeper seated psychological thing here that my suggestions, some of the suggestions I've heard earlier in the day when I was talking to people in the hallways about this, some of the texts I've received, like maybe there's something to that. that we're suggesting a lot of players that would probably replace Jamal Murray in the starting five. Just thinking out loud here. Take a break in a moment. Here's good text to close out the segment on. The Nuggets are wasting Nikola Jokic. Fair. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, Dikembe Mutombo, Antonio McDyess, Alex English, David Thompson, and yes, Nikola Jokic, all superb basketball players that the Nuggets in one way or another have kind of wasted. More Drive Time Sports after this. Our question of the day, which you can clearly see in graphic form. I'm going to streamline that graphic a little bit. I'm not in charge of the graphics. Question of the day, which star from your team's past would you bring to your team's present? Been talking about the Nuggets. I say Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Watch him go all Steph Curry on the league if he were playing next to Nikola Jokic. Tyler had Antonio McDyess. We've had Chauncey Billups and Alex English also thrown into the mix. And I did say if there was a player that, knowing full well that anybody you bring into the Nuggets current team playing aside next to Nikola Jokic is going to do great, just from a selfish perspective that I never saw David Thompson play and how special of a talent he was. It would be fun to see him on this iteration of the Denver Nuggets. How about this? And I'm being a little cheeky here, but what if we bring, like, just to see how it looks, what if we bring put Dikembe Mutombo next to Nikola Jokic? Or how about bring somebody brings like Earl Boykins onto this team, like instant offense on the second unit. Or you just take Carmelo and put him on the bench. I heard one earlier. I'll give credit to him. He never wants me to mention that he says it, but they're good suggestions I want to bring up. Roger, who does afternoons on Cat Country, brought up J.R. Smith. Kind of in the same line of thinking as I had, except he would fit better with Jamal Murray. Could you imagine J.R. Smith lining up from three-point range on all those easy passes to wide open threes that he would have? So that was another good one. Let's expand this a little bit. Let's open it up. How about your favorite NBA team if it doesn't happen to be the Denver Nuggets? Here's one. KG on the Celtics. Bring some mental toughness they need and would lessen the three-point barrage that led to their downfall this year. Yeah, they wouldn't quite be able to play the same way if they had KG. And finally, another Chris Austin, who does afternoons on KKFM. I hope I'm not betraying a trust. He is also has great affinity for the Boston Celtics team. In fact, he's wearing a Celtics shirt today. I asked him, who would KG replace in the lineup? You would keep Tatum and Brown, and then you'd have either Derek White or Drew Holiday. And let's be real, it's probably going to be Derek White moving forward in Boston. Drew Holiday is probably the odd man out there in the move that Brad Stevens is going to make. So you'd have Derek White, you'd have Tatum, you'd have Brown. Would it be then Porzingis and KG? Would that be the five? Would that be the ideal lineup? Bringing KG back onto the Boston Celtics? Chris, by the way, brought up Bill Russell. That was his choice. Bill Russell. Maybe some of the same thinking. Like, the three-point shooting is great. Let's have a different gear here. Let's play in a different way sometimes, having Bill Russell on this Celtics team. I mean, some of them with the NBA, I think, like with the Bulls, would be easy. Even if you're trying to look for, hey, and the Bulls aren't at the point now where they're like one piece away, right? So you can't quite do, well, they really need Dennis Rodman because they need rebounding, and that would put them over the top. No, they just need Jordan, right? So the Bulls one is easy. You bring back Michael Jordan. I think for the Lakers, it's pretty easy. I think you put Shaq. Right? I mean, Kobe would have his merits to be with this Lakers team, but what are the Lakers searching for? A big man. And you've had one of the best to ever do it. Put Shaq with LeBron and Luka. So that's the one that came to mind for me. I think Shaq would work for the Lakers and for the Magic. Have Shaq, Paulo Banchero, Mo Wagner, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, although they might trade him. And they even brought back, didn't I see this? The Magic are bringing back those amazing, both the Jazz and the Magic. Great job on their new uniforms because they're bringing back the old ones. And the Magic doing the pinstripes and the Jazz are doing the purple with the mountains? Or are they just wearing those one night? But I think Shaq, getting back to our topic, I think Shaq would be for the Magic and for the Lakers. Jordan would be for the Bulls. Celtics, I think the arguments are good. Oh, Albert Kareem. See, showing my age a little bit. I went Shaq. I think Albert's better. I think Kareem. I think Kareem would be better. Because you wouldn't say Magic because you have players in LeBron and Luka who need the ball. So they're not a team that, even though, Magic Johnson, hey, you could play with anybody, right? But I just don't think that would help out the Lakers the way that a Shaq or even Kareem would be better, probably. Shaq would take up room in the paint, right? And that's kind of where I think both LeBron and Luka would like to get in there at some point. Yeah, Kareem, that's a better one. Trying to think of some other ones. Of course, there are teams you can immediately cross off, given the rules that I have put into place long ago. The Thunder, you would go KD, and don't bring in Gary Payton or Sean Kemp into this because they're Sonics, they're not Thunder. Same, I know you're fighting it. You can't put big country Bryant Reeves with John Morant. It's not allowed. Bryant Reeves is a Vancouver Grizzly. This is the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, and the same rules apply. No George Mikan on this Lakers team. Sorry. Can't have him. Those are the rules. Different set of rules that I've put into place. Lakers will be fine, though, even if I said George Mikan is not allowed. Take your thoughts. What player, obviously specifically from the Nuggets past, would you put on this team? But we'll open up basketball, maybe get into another sport next hour. I really want to let this thing breathe and be able to talk about it a lot. So we'll see if we get into another team today. And if we don't, we'll just go to the next team tomorrow. But 719-247-1313 coming up next. We'll reset, hit the big stories of the day. One team making a coaching change, another one maybe. And hey, break up the Rockies. That's all next here on Extra Sports 1300. Hello there. Welcome in third hour on this Tuesday edition of Drive Time Sports. Ryan Kaufman with you, and I very much appreciate your patronage, whether you're listening on your radio, online, or through the Extra Sports 1300 app, or whether you're watching the show on our social media platforms at XTRA Sports 1300. Love to get your thoughts on the day's topic. 719-247-1313 is the number to call or text into, or you could tweet at me at Gingerly Tweets. We'll get back into kind of a fun sports radio discussion. We've kind of settled on the Nuggets in basketball, but I'm not opposed to moving to another sport or team. If you could take one player from your favorite team's past and put it on this iteration of said favorite team, who would it be? Been talking a lot about the Nuggets, little Celtics, little Lakers. We can open it up. But in the meantime, serious sports business to attend to. Here are the three stories that are driving the show. All right, we start with one team making a coaching change. There's a team that may a little bit later. Their story number two. Let's first talk about the team that actually went through with it. That was Shams Charania this afternoon on ESPN. The Knicks did indeed go through with it and fire Tom Thibodeau after they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Indiana Pacers. And you hear Shams lay out the resume and what this team has done. What makes this decision so curious, and by curious, I mean wrong, is that this is a Knicks team that's still going up. Where's the plateau here with the New York Knicks? Like, you make these kind of moves to get you to the next level when you stall out. Not when you're ascending. The New York Knicks this year exceeded expectation. They were better than they were the year before. I just, to put it in another way, I still think there was more meat on that bone when it comes to what Tom Thibodeau could get out of this Knicks team. They had new this year. They had quite a bit new. They had Mikal Bridges. They had Karl Anthony Towns. Both by the end of that series were public enemies 1 and 2 in New York City. So are we putting the fact that the Mikal Bridges trade looks like a ridiculous overpay, and the fact that Karl Anthony Towns can't be trusted on the defensive end, we're putting that on Tom Thibodeau? What I think this actually is, you saw the scenes in New York after they eliminated the Boston Celtics. That was a championship parade without the actual team. The way that the fans of New York conducted themselves after simply going to the Eastern Conference Finals was, and I'm not going to trash on them, because the New York Knicks, and it actually makes my point even more, the New York Knicks just haven't had even that level of success a lot recently. right? So I have no problem with the way the fans want to celebrate after beating the Boston Celtics. I think a lot of places looked at New Yorkers like, what are you doing? You just got to the Eastern Conference Finals. What is this about? But this is a team that has, to put it quite bluntly, sucked for a long time. So if they want to celebrate because they took down the vaunted Boston Celtics, go for it. But you can't let that affect you if you're in a decision-making position and suddenly think, because Knicks fans thought it was a foregone conclusion that they'd be playing for a championship starting on Thursday after they beat the Boston Celtics, and they dismissed the idea that the Indiana Pacers could give them any issues. That's fan behavior. That's fine. When you're a multi-million-dollar employee or close to $1 million, I don't know how much Leon Rose makes, but when you're in a position of making decisions, you don't get influenced by that. You have to look at the bigger picture. You have to look at it rationally. And the only rational view of this Knicks team is, in some ways, they overachieved. That is not a fireable offense. Now, I would not begrudge the New York Knicks or reports coming out to say that Thibodeau better make it happen next year and better get the Knicks to the NBA Finals or else he'll be gone. I wouldn't have a problem with that line of thinking. But to fire him now just seems like the Knicks' minds were clouded along with Knicks fans' minds. Like maybe Ben Stiller or Timothy Chalamet would have done this, but it should not be a decision made by somebody with actual power within the New York Knicks organization. They're trending up. And they exceeded expectation. You don't fire somebody when that happens. But there's always another side to all of this. When you bring up firing a head coach, who are you going to get that's better? And the Knicks are going to face this problem. Who are you going to get that's better? And a lot of the rumblings, and I've heard it for weeks, not weeks, I've heard it since Tyrese Halliburton hit them with the Reggie Miller choke action, their gesture. That's the word I'm looking for. Since Tyrese Halliburton hit him with the choke gesture at the end of game one, at the end of regulation of game one, I've heard Michael Malone's name from that point on. And yes, Michael Malone has a championship. And he deserves a lot of credit for said championship here in Colorado. But if I'm listening to some of the complaints from Knicks fans about not playing enough guys, not trusting the bench, maybe he rubs some players the wrong way, maybe he coaches a little bit too hard. If I just told you all that stuff, you would think I was talking about Michael Malone. So essentially, if that's the move, I don't know that it is, but if that's the move, you're essentially saying we love everything about Tom Thibodeau. We just want somebody that has a ring on their finger. And I think the problem that they're going to run into is that they will then, after they make that hire, look at their roster and go, oh, we don't have Nikola Jokic. Yeah, we may not be able to pull this thing off quite the way that Denver did. There is a specific type of team that Michael Malone is best suited to coach. And that was the team that the Nuggets were 3 or 4 years ago. The New York Knicks, if the idea is we're going to push past the Eastern Conference Finals and go to the NBA Finals, because Michael Malone has broken through. Like, you see what I'm saying here? Like, you're just getting Tom Thibodeau with a championship ring. And I don't know that that's a good enough reason to. I mean, Michael Malone's going to hate coaching Karl Anthony Towns. Like, really, what more is Michael Malone going to get out of this team that Tom Thibodeau couldn't? Again, I don't know that that's where they're going, but that's what I hear a lot of people out of New York say that should happen, and that ring can be blinding. I get it, but I'm just here to tell you, I don't think that Michael Malone is the cure for the Knicks' ills, and he is a carbon copy of Tom Thibodeau. Everything I have heard Knicks fans complain about over the years with Tom Thibodeau, and even going back to Chicago and Minnesota, are the same things that you and I have been talking about with Michael Malone the last couple of years. Maybe he had an epiphany after he was let go by Josh Kroenke. But if I'm the Knicks, I would need to hear that. Because then I don't know how much of a change this is really going to be. I don't get it. I would have stuck with Tibbs for another year. And the even better question is, if it's not Michael Malone, then really who is it? This isn't a championship team. So that different voice stuff, they're still building. They still need somebody to push them. I mean, I guess that's Michael Malone, but they're clearly saying that getting pushed by Tom Thibodeau, they don't like it. Weird. I don't get it. We go from a team that did make a coaching change to one that may be soon. Here's story number 2.
I didn't take that lightly, and I didn't blame it all on Jake. But, the reality is if you go back to last year's playoffs, he's lost 6 to 7 games to Edmonton, and we gave up 2 shots on 2 goals in an elimination game.
That was Pete DeBoer tossing his goalie, Jake Ottinger, under the bus and then backing up the bus and then driving it back over him again after embarrassing him by yanking him after 2 shots in what turned out to be the deciding game of the Western Conference Final. And now word out of Dallas is the players didn't quite take that well. Dave Pagnotta, noise out of Dallas, R.E. Pete DeBoer. Per multiple sources, players are not pleased with how he handled several situations during the Western Conference Final, along with post-Game 5 and exit media remarks. Told players voice concerns during internal exit interviews. DeBoer has 1 year left on his contract. I said at the time that Pete DeBoer broke one of the cardinal rules when it comes to pulling your goalie in the middle of the game. Even if every ounce of you is saying it's because of the goalie, you do not say it's because of the goalie. You chalk it up to giving your team a spark. To say nothing of the fact that Jake Ottinger, in many ways, not in many ways, is their best player. And I said at the time, with those comments, coupled with the fact that, oh, by the way, you want to talk about a coach that has hit a wall? You want to talk about a coach that may be a voice that isn't getting through to the extent it needs to? How about I've lost 6 of the last 7 Western Conference Finals, Pete DeBoer? Now, Dallas would have certainly some reason to part ways with their head coach. They've been at this longer than the Knicks have. They've stalled out. They've hit a wall. And losing another Western Conference Finals, coupled with what he said post-game about Jake Ottinger, when Jake Ottinger said in his exit interviews he was embarrassed. Now, he talked like a pro, but deep down, you could tell he's not happy about it, and his teammates aren't happy about it. So, a bunch of people kind of teasing, reading between the tea leaves. Is Pete DeBoer going to get the axe? We shall find out. But the idea that Pete DeBoer could just sit up there after what he did in that game 5 and say what he said about his franchise goaltender, I knew it was not going to just, everyone was just going to be cool with it. I could far more make the argument that Dallas needs a head coaching change than the Knicks do. Speaking of a team that has already made a coaching change, here's story number 3. Rockies television on the call. That is all the jubilation that you can possibly muster when you're calling. And I love Drew Goodman, but in calling a team that is to that point 9-50. But you know what? They got 10 wins. They got the win. They came back. They beat the Miami Marlins yesterday in a game that literally dozens of people watched. 5,800 and change, the paid attendance in Miami, to showcase two of the biggest blights on Major League Baseball, the Miami Marlins and the Colorado Rockies. But that's actually the attendance that those two franchises deserve, if we're being honest about it. Like, I think a lot of people around here wish that only 5,800 people went to Coors Field on a nightly basis. Then maybe some wheels would get in motion, some messages would be sent. I think a lot of Rockies fans looked at that attendance yesterday and went, A, what is going on in Miami? You've won 2 World Series titles. Have a little bit of pride, for Pete's sake. But also, too, I wish that most nights at Coors Field there were only 5,800 people, because then maybe Dick Monfort would finally be moved to doing something. But the question is, and it's one as old as time, if only 5,800 people see the Rockies hit double-digit wins on the season, did it really happen? And the answer, I have to say, according to the internet, is yes, because the Rockies are listed with 10 wins, 10-50. They are now only 26 games back of the LA Dodgers, which actually, that's not where we should be looking. They are now only 18 and a half games behind the Arizona Diamondbacks for second to last place in the NL West. Your 2025 Colorado Rockies, ladies and gentlemen. Catch the fever. By the way, they're playing the Marlins again, Eastern time zone and all. Bottom of the third, no runs for either team. I gotta see what the attendance is. I'm gonna look that up. I don't know what the difference between Monday and Tuesday. I can imagine it's a lot, but it's, you got a 9-50 team. They deserve to be seen by nearly 5,800. But hey, they pulled through. Got a win. Big win number 10. 79-24-7, 13-13. Take your thoughts on the 3 stories that are driving the show, or what player from your favorite team's past would you like to have on your team's present iteration? Next, here on Extra Sports 1300. The 45th U.S. Senior Open is returning to the Broadmoor for a record-tying third time. Get your tickets to see the world's best golfers compete June 26th through the 29th at ussenioropen.com. You know, I heard some interesting comments from Jack Nicklaus the other day. Scotty Scheffler wins another golf tournament. Also, in related news, water wet. And the sun came up today. Jack Nicklaus I don't remember the direct quote, but he was talking about how at a tournament like his, not talking about the majors, but talking about tournaments like his, how hurt they've been with this ongoing split in the golf world between LIV and the PGA Tour. Now, they were able to obviously figure out the majors. So we get Bryson DeChambeau, and we get these LIV guys to be a part of these majors. But for a tournament like Jack's, you don't get those guys. And I think when the LIV PGA thing was really hot, we talked a lot about this and the impact it would have on golf. But when the players were allowed to play in majors, because they weren't, they're not PGA, it's the USGA, it's, all those entities, as you know. And also, I think what has helped the relations there and help kind of not make it as bad to the casual golf fan is that Bryson has become kind of a fan favorite. When he went to LIV, like, you had no more it was him and Phil. You can't get better representatives of the evil that the LIV Tour is than Phil Mickelson and Bryson DeChambeau. Now Bryson's a good guy. People like Bryson. So they're happy to see him when he makes his way, to Augusta or to U.S. Open or what have you. But I think that as this has kind of gone on for a little while, so it's not quite as hot of a topic. And also, I think most people kind of settle into being fans of the majors, the casuals, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's been a big driver of the golf audience as they tune in for the majors. That's what it is. But for these other tournaments on the PGA calendar, like, that pain is still being felt. And Jack, who better to intimate it than Jack Nicklaus? Is like, I'm not getting the best field I can for my tournament. And it's hurting my tournament. Now, to be fair, where was Rory? But the point well taken from Jack Nicklaus, anyway, we tend to focus on the majors and everything's all good there because everybody shows up and you see the weird logos on Bryson DeChambeau's gear and you're like, oh yeah, he's on the LIV Tour. But it doesn't, if you just watch the majors, it doesn't make a difference. It's no different. I suppose with some of the lead up, like, how do you know how Bryson is doing now he's playing on the LIV Tour? But if you're just tuning in to watch that tournament and you're not really focusing too much on the form these guys are in coming in or anything like that, it doesn't change your golf viewing experience very much. But if you're an avid fan, if you watch the tournaments like the Memorial, the absences of some of these guys are pretty noticeable. Now, next week, not going to have this issue at the U.S. Open. I just thought it was the right messenger. It was the right messenger to kind of remind people, like, hey, this is still going on and this is still hurting golf. As many of us predicted it would, it is. And one of the best messengers, I suppose. I mean, maybe if Tiger was more vocal, but obviously Tiger's not one to be that way. Jack Nicklaus sitting up there and talking about it. Important reminder. No live stuff with the U.S. Senior Open. We get everybody. I mean, it's going to be star-studded. Obviously, when we get closer, we'll get the actual feel. But some of the names that the USGA folks and the Broadmoor folks were throwing out a few weeks ago at the media day, it's going to be really good feel. So, getting back to the matter at hand, USSeniorOpen.com, be a part of that. I like to move because as much as I would hope that you would join me tomorrow, I do want to honor those of you who texted in today. We've been talking more about the Nuggets and basketball than any others. I want to get to some of your texts for the other teams in Colorado, and then we'll expand the discussion as we go the rest of this show for the next 30 minutes, but we'll carry it over into tomorrow. For the Avs from the 719, I would love to have Patrick Waugh back. And I got in conversation with one of my coworkers today about this. And it's kind of the whole premise here. Like, whatever faults the Avalanche have, I mean, if you could make an argument that getting Patrick Waugh would make a lot of that better because he's Patrick freaking Waugh, right? You'd have unequivocally, if Patrick Waugh were playing in today's NHL, he would be the best goaltender on planet Earth. Bar none, 100%. Forget Ottinger, forget Connor Hellebuck, forget Igor. Patrick Waugh would be far and away the best goaltender in the NHL. And a great goaltender fixes a lot of your ills. Doesn't mean they go away. It's just they're compensated for by having one of the best goalies. And we could debate Brodeur and Waugh till the end of time. Call it 1A, 1B in whatever order you like. Have Patrick Waugh. And just to watch that level of goaltending, too, in a league that hurts for quality goaltending at times. I took mine the other way. I very much did it in the same vein I did the Nuggets. What do the Nuggets need more than anything else? Shooting. Who's the best shooter I can pull from the Nuggets past? Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. That's who I would choose. Now, if you needed somebody because you didn't want to essentially replace Jamal Murray, which I would be doing by adding Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, the two of them could not coexist. It would have to be Christian Brown at the two. You could bring in a Rashawn Leonard, you could bring in a J.R. Smith and accomplish kind of similar goal. It would very much be moves aimed at they need shooting. But I want the absolute best. And in Nuggets history, there's no one better than Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. For the Avalanche, I kind of took the same tack. And I'll just tell you mine right now. It's Peter Forsberg. Peter Forsberg. And you can't go wrong. If I said Joe Sakic, or if you say Joe Sakic, I'm not going to fight you. Right? I mean, we could play this out and like, well, then who wears the C? Is it Gabriel Landeskog or is it Joe Sakic? Who's playing on the first line? I guess I thought through that. There's really no wrong answer. Either one of them, I think, would be acceptable. I'm just going to take a guy that had to play behind Joe Sakic, and I'm going to put Peter Forsberg on the Avs second line. And I'm going to do this and call it a day because I have fixed the Colorado Avalanche. Could you imagine a top six of Natchez, McKinnon, and Landeskog, Lehkonen, Forsberg, and Nichushkin, that would fix them. So I'd go Peter Forsberg, and I think I have great affinity for both players. And I remember as a youngster, I won some kind of contest where it's some kind of media news. I think the Denver Post did it, or the Rocky Mountain News, where it was called Power Play Press. I believe one of the Avalanche's media relations people was in that with me, but that's neither here nor there. We went to Pepsi Center to meet, to kind of shadow and figure out what it's like being a beat writer and all that kind of stuff. And Joe Sakic actually took time. He was coming out of the locker room and took time to take a picture with all of us and meet all of us. Joe Sakic is a splendid human being. And I would love for Joe Sakic to be a part of this Avalanche team. I would very much also love Joe Sakic to be a part of this team as the man making the decisions on where the roster should go from here and not delegate so much of that. But I think from the fit, a second line center, and let's be honest about this, if Peter Forsberg stayed healthy, I mean, Peter Forsberg was a more talented player. Like Joe Sakic could be the GOAT of the Avs, but Peter Forsberg was their best player, the most talented player, at least until Nathan McKinnon. But I put Peter Forsberg. Second line center, boom, done. One of the most talented second line centers in the history of hockey. Peter Forsberg. Feel pretty good about that. From the 719, Nuggets, Chauncey Billups said that when Avs Nazem Kadri, that's good. That's good because you have the same mindset I do. You would just bring back Nazem Kadri and put him with this team. I like that. I went a little bit grander with the Peter Forsberg, but I mean, how getting that Nazem Kadri back on this team, like it's what they have been seeking since they won the Stanley Cup, was someone to play even close to the level that Nazem Kadri played the year they won the Stanley Cup. So Nazem Kadri is a great answer. If I were trolling, I would say Mikko Rantanen, but I'm not that guy. But I am also that guy. So Mikko Rantanen would be a good answer. Broncos with Terrell Davis, Rockies with Ubaldo Jimenez. And again, the thing with the Rockies, and I don't think any of those, I could see division with all of those guys. The thing about the Rockies is it would just literally be who you'd like to watch again. But I do like the Ubaldo pick because there was a moment in time, and it was only a moment, where Ubaldo Jimenez was arguably the best pitcher in Major League Baseball. And for that brief, shining moment, that meant that the Colorado Rockies had arguably the best pitcher in Major League Baseball. Another where I know where I was moments. I was at a banquet with my dad for Babe Ruth baseball. I think it was in Pueblo. I think it was at La Renaissance. And it was a banquet, and somebody my dad worked with at Babe Ruth baseball, but he was also my baseball coach, was being honored there. And that was the night that Ubaldo Jimenez threw the no against Atlanta. And we were following it. I don't know how we followed it. Was the internet on our phones back then? I know I was following it. We knew it happened. And then it all went sideways with Ubaldo Jimenez, as it does with so many Rockies pitchers. But I could see the argument for Ubaldo. And you finally get somebody in the starting rotation. I'll just bring up my Rockies one, and we'll bring these up tomorrow. I want to open it up and have more conversation. Mine was Cargo because I just want to see that swing. I just want to, and Cargo, you could argue one of the best players in Rockies history, right? But just watching Cargo at the plate like that, that was one of the great joys of being a Rockies fan. But it would literally just be what Rockies player did you like watching the most? Because Larry Walker, Todd Helton, Troy Tulowitzki, Nolan Arenado, Ubaldo Jimenez, Cargo, it doesn't matter. Not one of those guys is even making a dent in this nonsense that is going on at 20th and Blake right now. It would just be a welcome distraction. And the Rockies don't even have that. They thought Chris Bryant would be that. Like, now we stink, but Chris Bryant didn't quite work out. Or as a Rockies fan, maybe it's just a moment. I would like the moment when I don't want the actual players back. I just want the feeling back when the Rockies got Denny Nagel and Mike Hampton. I just want to feel that again. I don't want fast forward to when they actually pitched. I want no part of it. But just take me back. Maybe now I'm just hopping into a time machine and going back to my favorite sports moments when the Rockies signed Mike Hampton and Denny Nagel. And then it all went so wrong. I was even at opening day that year when Mike Hampton made his debut. Little rough. Had to work out some jams, but I think he only gave up one run against St. Louis. I think it was St. Louis they pushed again. You're like, it's okay. We'll be good. Mike Hampton. And it wasn't. It wasn't good. This from the 719, Andres Galarraga, Big Cat. My favorite player ever. Now, growing up, my favorite Rockies player was Dante Bichette. And I know if I polled my family would say Dante Bichette. Because we used to have our season tickets out in the left field bleachers. And Dante was the left fielder. So if it's just your favorite player coming, I guess I would have to say Dante Bichette. But as a Rockies fan, I would say it brought me no greater joy than watching Cargo swing the bat. Like the closest thing that I've ever seen to Ken Griffey Jr. swing was Cargo's. But Dante Bichette would make many members of my family very happy because we were big Dante Bichette household. Big Cat would be good. Trying to think, is there a player on the Rockies early that didn't make it to Coors Field? Not that, mile high, balls flew out of there as well, but someone that you never got to see in a Coors Field. I guess they all they're all kind of there. I don't think anybody of note just a year or two ago. But alas, it would make no difference. None whatsoever. These other ones, Avalanche, Broncos, Nuggets, I think we could find a player from these teams past make them a champion. And that doesn't have to be your motivation, but that's kind of the way I took it. What do these teams need? How can I dip into the team's past to get it? But it could be just who your favorite player was, or who you didn't get to see. Like I was talking about David Thompson, I never got to see him play. My dad just drilled it into me that I will never know just how good David Thompson. I never got to see him. So take some of your texts. Tomorrow, we'll open up the Avs discussion a little bit more in depth, and then obviously get into the Broncos because I think that the Broncos are very interesting. I think many NFL teams, when we talk about this tomorrow, are interesting when it comes to what player that you would pick. We already got one in for Terrell Davis. Not a bad pick at all. That's not mine. You have to wait for tomorrow for my pick. But we'll continue on your thoughts at 719 247 1313. Just trying to think of players that may have only played at Mile High for the Rockies that we didn't get to see play at Coors Field, and maybe they would be an option to bring to this current Rockies team. Here's a good pull, Dale Murphy. But here's the thing, and you're right. And that's, you were answering me, and you're 100% right. Dale Murphy, when he was with the Rockies, wasn't Dale Murphy. So I don't know that I want to see that Dale Murphy at Coors Field more than I would like to see Cargo again, or Tulo, or Dante, or Galarraga, or Vinny Castilla, or Larry Walker. But yeah, you're right. He was one. He was one player that was on the early Rockies, and that felt like a big get given Dale Murphy's career, but don't know if he was that guy anymore, and he wasn't on the Rockies very long. I'll tell you which Rockies player I wouldn't bring back would be Charlie Blackmon, and it's not because of anything Charlie Blackmon is, it's because of his walk-up song. And maybe that's the best determining factor on which Rocky you would want to bring back. Because then Larry Walker, if you just wanted to be back at Coors Field and hear the music, you could say Larry Walker because Crazy Train. Dante Bichette, I think, has a strong case because he had Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. That was good. Who else? And Brian Fuentes closed out games and had Stained. That was good. That was a good bullpen reliever walk-up song. But if we're just going walk-up songs, Charlie Blackmon has to be out. Never again. But then you would have Walker, you would have Dante Bichette. You know what one? It was always that song On the Road Again. I need not Willie Nelson, but the one that Metallica covered. So it comes in, and I need Chris Austin from KKFM because he could tell me this song. I'm not as well versed. But I always thought it was weird when Kurt Manwaring came to bat because, like, there would be that saxophone part of that song. And I thought it was, like, so weird. Like, it sounded like, and I may be getting my years mixed up, it sounded like what Val Venus in the WWE would come out to. Like, it always was so off-putting when Kurt Manwaring came to the plate because and that's a great song that I can't think of the name of it or who originally did the song. So I'm telling on myself, I'm not as musically inclined as most people are. But I always had the saxophone part. And I was like, what is this? That's the thing about walk-up songs. You got to make sure that the beginning hits you. That's why Larry Walker's Crazy Train worked. That's why some people that I don't want to associate with ever really got into Charlie Blackmon's song. Gotta get him early, and Kurt Manwaring didn't understand that with his walk-up song. You know how I know that, and this is what I'll leave you with today, and we'll pick back up this conversation of what, why don't you sleep on it? What player from your favorite team's past would you bring to this iteration of your favorite team? We'll weave that in with whatever the day's topics are tomorrow. I'll leave you with this. You know how I know Michael Malone is not getting that job in New York? Shams on Pat McAfee on what type of coach the Knicks might be looking for. Quote, a guy that might trust his bench more, a guy that might be a little bit more lenient based on his principles. It's not the Michael Malone I know. And then where'd he go? Maybe they're holding out hope that they finally land Steve Kerr after all of this time. Anyway, I'm sorry. Don't, again, not a big music guy. So don't know these things. Yeah, turn the page he had. And it was the saxophone part. And I'm like, what is this? Anyway. Maybe if he would have played the Metallica version. That'll do it for the show. Appreciate your patronage and your interaction. Especially the topic that I did today. If I'm just without your interaction, it is not nearly as fun. So thank you for that. Hopefully you'll join me tomorrow to do it again. We'll really get into the Broncos in the NFL. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And we'll see what else is going on. And we'll preview the Stanley Cup final and other stuff. Maybe more great Rockies walk-up songs. And maybe I'll expose myself for not knowing anything about music. Enjoy your evening. We'll talk tomorrow.